When we bought the old cabin, we thought we were getting a quiet weekend retreat, a place to escape the grind of city life. Nestled on 5 acres just outside the gates of a rustic lifestyle community, the property had a big wraparound porch, a barn that smelled like cedar, and enough distance between us and the nearest neighbor that we could see stars at night. It wasn't cheap, but it was perfect. What we didn't realize when we signed the paperwork was that we were also buying into an HOA. Not a normal one. Either, this one called itself a Ranch Stewardship Association and prided itself on enforcing community standards that, in reality, were a nosy neighbor's dream come true. The first time I met the woman who ran the place, her name was Karen, and she lived up to every stereotype. She showed up on our porch before we'd even finished unloading the moving truck. "You can't park that there," she said, pointing to my trailer. "It violates the visual harmony clause." I stared at her, sweaty and tired from hauling furniture. "Visual harmony?" "It's in the CCRs," she said, waving a binder thicker than a phone book. "Trailers must be stored out of sight. I'm the association president. You'll be receiving a welcome packet." My wife, Emma, came out holding a box labeled kitchen and gave me a look that said, "Don't start." I forced a smile. "Thanks for the information," I said, though I was already thinking we might have made a mistake buying here. Over the next few months, the HOA notices started rolling in. One for leaving the barn lights on overnight. One for stacking firewood too close to the property line. One for using the wrong stain on the porch rails. It felt like we were under surveillance. Then came the master key incident. Apparently, the HOA had what they called emergency access keys, master keys to every cabin, kept for safety purposes. We were told they would only be used in a true emergency, like a gas leak or a fire. But one Friday evening, as we were sitting by the fire drinking wine, we heard the unmistakable sound of our front door handle jiggling. Emma froze. I grabbed the poker from the fireplace and crept toward the door. When it swung open a crack, I yanked it wide and there was Karen standing on our porch holding a clipboard and a shiny key. "What are you doing?" I barked. She jumped back, clearly startled. "I was just performing an inspection. Without knocking?" Emma demanded. "I'm authorized," Karen sniffed. "This key is for emergency access." "There is no emergency," I said.
"You don't get to just walk into our cabin whenever you feel like it." Her eyes narrowed.
"You signed the CCRs. The association has the right to access properties for compliance checks." "Not like this," I snapped. "Get off my porch." She huffed but left, muttering about reporting us for non-cooperation. The next day I changed the locks. That, apparently, was the ultimate sin. A week later, we got a certified letter accusing us of denying emergency access and threatening fines. I ignored it. I wasn't about to give that woman a free pass to waltz into my house whenever she wanted. Things simmered for a while, until the weekend that turned into a showdown. It was late spring, one of those perfect days where the air smells like pine and the grass is just starting to turn bright green. Emma and I had just come back from town with groceries when we found Karen standing in the driveway, arms crossed. "Your key doesn't work," I said before she could speak. "That's because you illegally changed the locks," she snapped. "We have a scheduled inspection today. You're required to grant access." "No, we're not," I said. "Not without notice and not without us present." "And guess what? You didn't send notice." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the sheriff." I almost laughed. "Go ahead." And she did. While we unloaded the groceries, Karen stood in the driveway, loudly explaining to the dispatcher how we were violating community safety protocols and endangering the neighborhood. Emma just shook her head. "She's going to look ridiculous," Emma said. "I know," I said, though I felt a flicker of unease. Out here, the sheriff's office tended to side with whoever sounded the most official, and Karen sounded very official. When the call ended, Karen smirked. "They're sending a deputy. I hope you're ready for a citation." Emma, bless her, didn't even flinch. She went inside, poured herself a cup of coffee, and waited. 20 minutes later, the phone rang. Karen had apparently given the sheriff's office our number too, because when I picked up, it was a deputy on the line asking for me to explain the situation. Before I could answer, Emma grabbed the phone. "Hi, deputy," she said sweetly. "Yes, we're here." "No, there's no emergency. Our neighbor is just upset because we changed our locks. Yes, we have the legal right to do that." "No, she doesn't have a warrant." "Oh." Would you like me to email you a copy of the property deed? I watched her pace the kitchen, calm and confident, as she dismantled Karen's complaint point by point. When she hung up, she smiled. They're not coming. They said this is a civil matter and told Karen to leave. Outside, Karen's phone buzzed. She read whatever message she'd received, then glared at us through the window. This isn't over, she shouted. But she got in her car and drove away. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Karen might have left our driveway that day, but she didn't leave us alone. The next week, we got not one but 3 letters from the Ranch Stewardship Association. The first was a notice of violation citing us for denial of scheduled inspection. The second was a warning of fines threatening $500 per day until we restored the HOA's access. And the third was a notice of a special board hearing scheduled for the following Saturday, where we were required to appear and explain our noncompliance. I was ready to toss them all in the trash, but Emma stopped me. No, she said, holding the letters like evidence. We're going to this hearing. I want to see the look on Karen's face when we tell her she doesn't own this cabin. Saturday morning came, and we drove to the association clubhouse, a log-sided building with a big stone fireplace that looked cozy but felt hostile the moment we stepped inside. There were 5 people sitting at a long table up front. Karen in the center, looking smug, flanked by 4 board members who looked bored already. A handful of residents sat in folding chairs, whispering to each other. Thank you for coming, Karen said, her voice dripping with false politeness. This hearing is to address the homeowner's repeated violations of CCR 8.3, emergency access. She launched into a speech about community safety, emergency protocols, liability, insurance. It was all very official sounding, but when she finished, Emma simply pulled a folder from her bag and laid our deed, property plat, and a copy of the state's homeowner's Bill of Rights on the table. You don't have a legal right to enter our home without our consent, Emma said calmly. Your key failed because we changed the locks. That's not a violation of anything. And if you fine us, we'll sue. A ripple went through the room. Karen blinked, clearly not expecting us to be prepared. The CCRs clearly state, Emma cut her off. State law trumps your CCRs. If you want to come into my house, you can get a court order. One of the board members coughed into his hand to hide a smile. Karen's face turned bright red. This is outrageous. You are putting everyone at risk. No, I said. You're abusing your authority. There's a difference. The hearing ended with Karen declaring that the matter would be escalated to the legal committee, whatever that meant. After that, the harassment really began. We started getting daily compliance notices for grass growing too tall, for excessive noise even though we were gone half the time, for improperly stored tools, because I left a shovel leaning against the barn. One evening, we came back from town to find a notice taped to the door that read, "Final warning" in big red letters. I'm getting real tired of this, I muttered. Emma put her hands on her hips. Let her keep digging. Every letter she sends us is another nail in her. Coffin if this goes to court. Then came the night Karen tried to force the issue. It was late, after midnight, and we were both asleep when the motion light outside the cabin clicked on. I woke instantly, my heart pounding, and grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand. When I looked out the window, I saw 2 figures on the porch, Karen and another man, both in hoodies, both holding flashlights. I stormed to the door and yanked it open. What the hell do you think you're doing? I shouted. Karen nearly dropped her flashlight. We had a report of a water leak. At midnight? Emma yelled from behind me. The board authorized an emergency inspection, Karen stammered. No, they didn't, I snapped. Get off my property before I call the sheriff myself. The man with her, probably her husband, grabbed her arm and muttered something. She glared at me but retreated, muttering about how we were non-compliant and a danger to the community. The next day, we installed cameras. 2 weeks later, those cameras would end up saving us. It happened on a Saturday afternoon while we were at the feed store. My phone buzzed with a motion alert from the porch camera. When I pulled it up, I saw Karen standing there again, trying the door handle. When it didn't open, she pulled out a shiny silver key, probably a copy of the so-called master key, and tried it. When that didn't work, she actually took out her phone and dialed. Emma and I stood in the aisle of the store, listening through the camera's microphone as she called the sheriff, again, and claimed we were illegally barricading the property. This time, when the deputy called us, I handed the phone to Emma. "Deputy," she said cheerfully, "I think you should see this for yourself. I have live video of our HOA president trying to enter our house without permission." The deputy paused, then asked her to send the clip. 10 minutes later, we got a call back. "Ma'am," he said, "I've reviewed the footage. This is a civil matter, but for what it's worth, if she tries it again, you're within your rights to press trespassing charges." When we got back to the cabin, Karen was still there, pacing in the driveway. "They told me you sent them a video," she said. "Yup," Emma said, "and they told us next time. We can have you arrested." Karen's face went white. "This isn't over," she hissed, but she got in her SUV and tore down the gravel road so fast she kicked up a cloud of dust. I looked at Emma and grinned. "I think we just won round 1, Emma smiled back. "Round 2's going to be even better." Karen didn't come back to the cabin for a while after that, but she didn't stay quiet either. About a month later, we got a thick envelope from a law firm with a name that sounded expensive. Inside was a demand for compliance, claiming we had breached the CCRs, endangered public safety, and violated the HOA's right of access. They wanted us to change the locks back, pay $4,500 in fines, and submit to a full property inspection within 10 days. I laughed when I read it. Emma didn't laugh. She smiled, which was scarier. "Perfect," she said. "Now we get to go on offense." She called a real attorney, not some cousin who dabbled in real estate, but a bulldog litigator who had sued HOAs before. His name was Dan, and within a week he had fired off a response letter that was so brutal it was almost poetic. In legal language, he told them to shove it. He cited state law, federal law, and half a dozen precedent cases. He told them that if they fined us again or set foot on our property without consent, we'd sue for harassment, trespass, and emotional distress. He also CC'd the county sheriff, the county attorney, and the local news station. 2 days later, my phone rang. "This is insane," Karen fumed. "You brought lawyers into this?" "You started it," I said. "You should have just left us alone." Her voice shook with anger. "You think you can make a mockery of this community? You think you can ignore the rules and get away with it?" "I think I can protect my own home," I said, and hung up. That weekend, the HOA called a special community meeting. Word spread fast, and by Saturday night, the clubhouse was packed. Emma and I sat in the front row while Karen stood at the podium like a general preparing for war. "These homeowners are a danger to the entire community," she declared. "They are denying us access to critical safety systems. They are undermining the authority of this association. They are following the law," Emma cut in, standing up. A ripple of laughter went through the room. Karen glared. "You will have your turn to speak." "I'm speaking now," Emma said. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and projected the porch camera footage onto the wall using the clubhouse's own TV. Everyone watched as Karen tried the door handle, then tried the master key, then called the sheriff. The room went silent. "Do you see this?" Emma said. "This woman tried to enter our home without permission. She lied to law enforcement about an emergency that didn't exist. If this is what safety inspections look like, none of you are safe." A man in the back stood up. "Wait, you've been using those keys on everyone's houses?" Karen's mouth opened and closed. "Only in emergencies," the man snorted. "Like this emergency?" He pointed at the screen. Murmurs filled the room. Someone else shouted, "I want my locks changed too." Karen tried to regain control, but it was too late. The board members looked uneasy and the crowd was turning. "This meeting is adjourned," Karen barked, slamming the gavel. People didn't leave right away. They clustered in groups, whispering, glaring at Karen as she gathered her papers. One of the board members even came up to us on the way out and said quietly, "I think you just won over half the neighborhood." But Karen wasn't done. 2 weeks later, the HOA filed an actual lawsuit against us, claiming breach of contract and seeking injunctive relief to force us to restore their access. Dan was thrilled. "This is a gift," he said. "They just opened themselves up to discovery. We're going to pull every record they have, every time they've used those keys, every complaint they've filed, every penny they've spent on legal fees." It turned out to be worse than even we imagined. Through discovery, We learned that Karen had used the master key on more than a dozen properties without notice over the last 2 years. Some of those homeowners had no idea. She had even entered one cabin while the owners were on vacation, to check the fireplace flue. Dan called a press conference. Local reporters showed up at the courthouse steps. Emma stood next to Dan, cool and collected, as he explained that the HOA president had been conducting warrantless searches of private homes. By the next day, the story was on the front page of the local paper, HOA president accused of trespass. The headline screamed. Karen went ballistic. She left me a voicemail that was so unhinged we saved it and sent it straight to our lawyer. "This is defamation," she shrieked. "You are destroying my reputation! You will regret this!" But the damage was done. At the next HOA meeting, nearly every resident showed up. This time, Karen didn't sit at the center of the table. She sat off to the side, pale and tight-lipped. When the floor opened for comments, neighbor after neighbor stood up to demand answers. Why were they never told about the master key policy? Why were they paying legal fees to sue a homeowner over locks? Why was the board siding with Karen at all? By the end of the night, 3 board members had resigned. Karen stormed out before the meeting was over. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and dread. She was cornered now, and a cornered HOA president was a dangerous thing. Emma squeezed my hand. "She's going to do something desperate," I nodded. "We'll be ready." The day of the trial felt like stepping into the third act of a movie. Emma wore her best blazer, her hair tied back in that no-nonsense way that meant she was ready for war. I'd never seen her so calm. Not the calm of someone who isn't worried, but the calm of someone who knows they're going to win. The courthouse was full. Apparently word had gotten around because several neighbors came to watch, sitting in the gallery and whispering to each other as we walked in. Karen was already there, sitting stiffly at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, her jaw set like stone. Dan leaned over to us. "Don't worry," he said. "This is going to be quick." The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes, called the room to order. The HOA's lawyer stood and gave a polished opening statement about community safety, contractual obligations, and the sanctity of CCR agreements. Then, "It was Dan's turn, Your Honor," he said. "This is not a case about safety. This is a case about power. The plaintiff is not here because my clients put anyone in danger. They are here because my clients refused to let the HOA president walk into their home without permission. That is the entire case." He let that hang in the air before continuing. And what the plaintiff will not tell you is that this so-called safety inspection power has been abused repeatedly for years, not just on my client's home, but on multiple homes in this community. We have the records. We have the video. We have sworn statements from other homeowners. What we have here is not a violation by my clients, but a pattern of trespass by the plaintiff. Karen visibly flinched. Over the next 2 days, Dan laid it all out. First came the video from our porch camera. The jury watched in silence as Karen tried the key and called the sheriff. Then came testimony from 3 other neighbors who admitted they'd found evidence of entry into their homes when they were out of town. Then came the emails, obtained through discovery, where Karen bragged to the board about catching people with non-compliant curtains and monitoring properties for unauthorized guests. By the time Dan was done, it wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a full-blown exposé. Karen's lawyer tried to spin it, claiming everything she did was within the HOA's authority. But the judge didn't look convinced. Finally, it was Karen's turn on the stand. Dan was merciless. "Mrs. Wilkins," he said, "on the night of March 14th, why did you attempt to use the master key to enter my client's home?" "It was an emergency inspection," Karen said tightly. "What was the emergency?" "There was a report of a water leak." "Who reported it?" She hesitated. "A neighbor." "Which neighbor?" "I don't recall." Dan let that sit for a beat before holding up a copy of the sheriff's report. "Interesting? Because the sheriff's office has no record of any leak, and none of the surrounding neighbors recall making a report. In fact, your own email to the board that night said, and I quote, 'Going to check on the Joneses' locks tonight. Maybe we can catch them breaking another rule.'" A collective murmur went through the courtroom. Karen's face turned crimson. "That was taken out of context," Dan cut her off. "So you admit you weren't responding to an emergency?" I was acting in the community's best interest." She sputtered. Dan smiled. "No further questions." By the time closing arguments wrapped up, the outcome was obvious. The judge ruled in our favor on every count. The HOA's complaint was dismissed with prejudice, meaning they couldn't refile. The court also granted us a permanent injunction prohibiting the HOA from using master keys on our property, and awarded us damages for harassment and legal fees. When the gavel fell, Emma squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Karen sat motionless, her face pale. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Dan gave a short statement about homeowners' rights and privacy. Emma just smiled and said, "We're happy the court agreed that our home is our sanctuary." By that evening, the story was everywhere. Local news, Facebook groups, even the regional paper. HOA president loses key case, the headline read. The fallout was swift. At the next HOA meeting, Karen didn't show up. In fact, she resigned as president the very next day. The board, desperate to save face, passed a new resolution abolishing the master key policy entirely. Within a month, 3 other homeowners had changed their locks too. One neighbor stopped by our cabin to thank us. "You two did what none of us had the guts to do," he said. "She's been running this place like her own fiefdom for years." Emma smiled. All we did was stand up for ourselves. Summer came, and for the first time since we bought the place, the cabin felt like a refuge again. No more notices. No more surprise visits. No more Karen. One evening, as the sun set behind the pines, Emma and I sat on the porch with a bottle of wine. The air was cool, the crickets were singing, and for once there was no tension in the air. "Do you think she's still mad?" I asked. "Oh, definitely," Emma said with a grin. "But that's not our problem anymore." We clinked glasses. "For peace and quiet," I said. "For locked doors," she replied. And we laughed, the kind of laugh that comes when the storm is finally over. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the wind rustle through the trees, I realized something. We hadn't just won a lawsuit. We had taken back our home, our space, our right to sit by the fire without worrying who might be rattling the doorknob. For the first time since we'd moved in, I slept without waking once.